Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Luke Sutters.
Hello.
John Epperson.
Hello, everybody.
Valentino Stoll.
Hey there.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Huzefa. I'm not even going to try and say your last name, man. Do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe you can say it, and let us know who you are and why you're famous.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Charles. So I am working in Ruby on Rails since last more than 6 years, and I had a great time. I didn't decided to end up on Ruby on Rails, but destiny is already written. So I started in Java, and then automatically, some projects came and I had to switch on Ruby on Rails. And after that, it's like not looking back. It's going on, and I hope it will go on in the future.
Awesome. Did you work your tail off to get that senior developer gig just to realize that senior dev doesn't actually mean dream job? I've been there too. My first senior developer job was at a place where all of our triumphs were the bosses and all the failures were ours. The second one was a great place to continue to learn and grow, only for it to go under due to poor management. And now I get job offers from great places to work all the time. Not only that, but the last job interview I actually sat in was a discussion about how much my podcast had helped the people interviewing me. If you're looking for a way to get into your dream job, then join our Dev Heroes Accelerator. Not only will we help you get the kind of exposure that makes you attractive to your dream employer, but you'll be able to ask them for top dollar as well. Check it out at devheroesaccelerator.com. I'm a little curious what prompted the switch from Java to Rails. We're going to be talking about Docker here in a minute, but I was just curious.
So it's more of not a technology barrier, but it was like a company's projects that when I started my career in my country, in my state. So we didn't get that much projects in Java. So that caused a lot of shortage of if there's a shortage of projects, then the companies do cut down the force the developers. So we had to find some technology which was in demand, and Ruby on Rails was, and I think it's still in demand at that time. So and we had we already had companies, but the companies were like startups. And at that time I just graduated from my college, and it was very much new for me, but it was a very great experience. I OCJP, Oracle certified certification in Java.
Mm-hmm.
And then switching to Ruby was a very smooth experience, because from coming from Java to Ruby is like very much smooth, because you already have the concepts and fundamentals clear. So it was very much smooth for me. Yes, so that was pretty much the reason.
Awesome. Well, I like the not looking back part. Your life will be better.
I get that.
What's that thing that Java developers have to punish you for using libraries? Is it Maven? You remember Maven?
Punish you for using libraries.
Oh my word. I used to spend hours trying to put libraries into Maven compared to Gem install. You hear what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like two different worlds.
Yeah.
They're very different. I mean, not everybody like chooses to come over to Rails. Sometimes Rails chooses you. I was also somebody that just kind of like backed into it and was very happy with my luck in the end.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't make the jump to Grails from Java. That seems to be very, very common.
I had it offer.
Yeah.
I had it offer Valentino. I had it offer Grails. So, but again, that the projects were not that much in Grails. So again, that barrier came.
Yeah, I gotta go with the Workus.
What is Grails? Is that like an Indiana Jones thing?
It's okay. So my context with Grails, we have a project that's written in Grails that we're porting over to Ruby on Rails, and working on the Grails is pain. But I can't speak to like how well factored or whether they followed best practices or anything like that. So
when it came to choosing frameworks, did they choose poorly?
I love that movie. Anyway, I'm going to push this into Docker, talking about Docker. Huzefa, you wrote this article about Rails on Docker Simplified, and you talked kind of through the setup that you have. Is there a story behind this? Is there like some process that you went through that pushed you to move to Docker? I know a lot of people still just run like Rails server on their machine. And so I was curious why this particular transition.
Yes, sure. So it's like I have mentioned this problem in my article too. So when we work as a freelance, developers. So let's say if I'm working with you and or anyone, they might come up with the same project and with the same issue. Let's say they are using MacBook code on their end too, but still they will come up like I am getting this error, and it is true because setting up Rails anytime will give you n number of errors, right? So to solve this particular issue, like so I was working on a project, and I had to make sure that the developer working with me also on the same page. Like it should not be like I am already setting up the application and he is not able to. So uh, I decided to see that if I can, So my first approach was regarding a virtual machine, to set up a virtual machine, and then to give an access to him also, so that we both work on the same machine. But then I had that idea of Docker, but I didn't had exact idea that how should I exactly set up my Rails application on the Docker. So I went through some fantastic articles on DigitalOcean and all. So I went through some articles. I spent around 2 to 3 days setting up the Rails application on Docker, and then I was able to set up the whole Linux environment, the gems, and once that is done for the setup, then we can just push the code, and the person can just run the Docker build command, and is it will be installed directly on the Rails application is directly available on the container. So he doesn't need to worry about his local machine and dependencies and all the libraries. We already have a common script, and he can just complete the setup within 30 to 45 minutes. So that was the source of me going, jumping into Docker, and then I was inspired by DigitalOcean article. So I decided to put my experience in this article, so that someone it might get helpful to someone if they're trying to set up their application. So that was pretty much my story behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps. So I run Docker for all of my stuff now, and it really does help if I have somebody else coming on board, or like you said, setting up the app. It's nice to be able to just basically tell them to install Docker and then just do a Docker compose up or something like that, and just kind of have it set everything up for them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that as well. My old consulting gigs, you get some kind of strange setup requests. I think it was Oracle and Java using JRuby, that combo. If we had a Docker container, we'd save a lot of time upfront setting up multiple workspaces, because who has Oracle on their machine?
Oracle.
Oracle's great. I love Oracle. We are sponsored by Oracle, aren't we?
I worked for a place where we used Oracle as well, and Dockerizing that was one of the highlights of my time there.
Did it pay off?
We used VMs before that. It was a huge payoff.
Interesting. I find VMs easier. I might just be a dinosaur, but I find VMs much easier than Docker.
So here's the thing with VMs that I found that convinced me that Docker was better. When you want to push an update for a VM, like the whole process from you pushing it up, or sorry, making the update, pushing it up, the person downloading it and getting it running successfully on the other side is like multiple days, right? Whereas me pushing a Docker change is like hours. It's just a huge time difference.
I don't know. I had pretty good success with Vagrant in that regard. I'm sure there are other benefits though.
Except when your underlying machine would break.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, building an app with Vagrant is not great.
I mean, yeah, I just used to take snapshots. I mean, surely you just send them the snapshot, and then they've got the snapshot.
Yes, but what I'm trying to say is so taking care of a VM, right, is the same as taking care of a machine. So you're not counting all of the babying time that you're having to do to take care of this machine that's living, that's you don't want to destroy, right? If you want to keep making snapshots, you got to keep it alive, right? So you have somebody theoretically taking care of this machine, and all of that time taking care of the machine is real. You have to include that in the time that you're talking about. And that's more or less what I'm trying to get at, is when I step back and think about all that time that's really going into pushing those new updates and things, that person's taking, whoever it is that's the source of your VM, right? is taking care of that machine. They're also uploading this huge many gigs file or whatever. I mean, Docker files can get somewhat big too.
Yeah.
But they're usually like 10th of the size or something like that. But yeah, you push up this huge VM. You hope that the person on the other side doesn't have any troubles. Like, I don't know how many times I had trouble like updating my VM with a new snapshot or whatever. It almost always was a wipe and replace because that's just the way it was. And that's lost data, things like that, right? Docker separates, those things out. If I want to update my Docker container, I just push a change to a file. My data's stored on a volume. So, I get my update. It doesn't wipe out my data. Things like that. Anyway, that's been my experience, is that VMs took a lot longer for me.
So, yes, Valentino, sorry.
I was going to say, Huzefa, did you experience any issues Dockerizing JVM and JRuby?
I didn't try it with JRuby, so I have not done that. But yes, I had run into some issues, while setting up So I remember one of those issues. Like, so we were using Ubuntu machines, Ubuntu laptops. So now we are using MacBooks and all. So even if you go and just search libssl 1.0, it's a library in Ubuntu, right? And it's related to OpenSSL library internally. This created a heck of issues, and like days were literally spent to solve this issue. And it has issues with Docker too, because if you miss to configure the correct Linux or Ubuntu environment, along with when you're so we have to mention that what libraries we need to install on the Docker container. Okay, so if you miss even with a single version or a minor version, then the main, because that's the main backbone of the whole application, because the Linux libraries will get installed, and then them install and will all happen. So if that's not properly installed, then it's the Rails application, you can just forget. So we had a hard time, but yes, we figured that out, and we were able to solve that particular issue. One more thing that I would like to mention is that Docker was experienced like a year now. So I am always also using Doku. So Doku is a PaaS service, so which is a more, we can say, lighter version of Docker. So Docker comes in under as we can say, it's a virtual machine category kind of, but Docker is a more lighter in a simple version of Docker. So with less configurations, and easy to configure. So I am using it now since last 6 months. So I haven't decided to write an article, but sure, I will put that too into one of the articles.
I'm not familiar with this. How do you spell it?
It's DO. Yes, correct. Brilliant.
Doku.
It's DOKKU.
That's very interesting.
DOKKU. Yep.
I agree with you, Huzefa. I've run this on a personal machine server before, and it's like Heroku, right? It uses the build packs.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I think I've looked at this. I haven't actually run it anywhere.
Now that they have a binary from apt-get or something like that, they have popular packages now, it's much easier to install and update. But in the past, I've had a painful experience upgrading it.
Yeah, I haven't had to build my own package in Ubuntu for a long time. When I started out, it was quite a regular occurrence. 8 to 10 years ago, you'd need like the latest version of libUSB, and you'd break out that tarball and that source tarball, and you'd be in there rebuilding it. I'm pretty sure I haven't done that this decade.
Yeah, one of the things that I've enjoyed about using Docker, right, is when you do have those situations where you do have to make it. You make it that one time, you upload your image, and then all your developers download it, and they don't have to make it.
Yeah.
I've got an embarrassing.
Put them on Docker Hub.
You want to hear my embarrassing Docker secret? I used Docker to run Ruby 3 because I couldn't work out how to install Ruby 3.0 on my Ubuntu box. And even now telling you this, I feel ashamed of myself, but I did.
No.
I'm laughing because I love it as a hack to not have to figure it out.
Couldn't get it. Had to Docker it.
So
I'm so lazy. I'm thinking that's a good way to just not have to worry about it. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that the the Ruby Docker Hub, I think, still has the old Ruby images as far back as you want to go. Let's see.
Yes, so I tried with 2.3, I think, and that's the one is the latest which is supported. I will have to check if there is any latest ones available.
I see 1.9.3 in here. So if you have an ancient Ruby version, you shouldn't be using 1.9.3 for security reasons, I think, at this point. But I guess if you're still there, there's a 1.9.3 build I see back here. No 1.8 though.
Aw,
Thank goodness.
that reminds me of the good old days when I started with Ruby.
Ah,
That was my
Yeah.
starting point. Yeah.
1.8 point, what, 2 or 3, I think is the first version I used.
I don't go back past 1.8 or 1.8's my starting point too.
So you said that, Huzefa, you said that you had some struggles when you were trying to install, I think it was like libSSL, I think is what you said, in your Docker stuff, getting that configured, all that kind of stuff just kind of was a fun journey for you, so to speak, or whatever. I mean, you guys set up this Docker Compose for your development environment. I presume that you have this deployed somewhere. Do you have similar problems? Do you have a completely different setup for production? You mentioned Kubernetes at the bottom of your article. Are you using Kubernetes or anything? Are you doing anything in that way with your actual production system?
Yes, so currently we have a setup of Kubernetes pods. So we have done the setup for CI/CD, which has as soon as we create a PR, we are able to merge to the master branch of the repo on a Kubernetes pods. So the environment, the we already defined what environment will be installed for that pod, and usually we keep it for 1 GB only. We don't create more than 1 GB pod. And once it takes around 5 to 6 minutes to deploy, it gets automatically deployed, and then we are able to test out our branch against master on a particular environment. So it's the whole deployment and all process is automated. So with the Docker
Okay.
containers, it's clustered into, with the help of Kubernetes, we have clustered into pods, and these pods gets automatically deployed when we create a branch against master in our repo. So that's
Makes
the whole
sense.
setup, and that's the way we use Docker internally. So wanted to mention that we use Codacy for this whole CI/CD setup. Codacy is a tool which we use for this setup. This I think so. This is what I'm talking about
Go to see.
for
Awesome.
checking the code and all.
Nice. Yeah.
And yes, so I think
Good.
yes.
Yeah. I think. I mean, these guys have shown up to RailsConf and things before. I've said hi. Yeah. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about as we were kind of talking about like Docker and stuff is, so you spent a bunch of time trying to get this Ubuntu setup working for your development environment. And obviously Kubernetes has its own things that you have to care about and stuff like that, right? But since you solved that, right, in your Docker container, I presume you didn't have to solve it a second time in production. Your Docker container just deployed and things work, right?
I didn't got the last part. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. So I was thinking that because you solved the libSSL problem in your Docker container during it, when you're getting it set up for development environment, then when you took your container and went to production, things worked pretty smoothly, I presume, right?
Yes,
You didn't have
exactly.
to
Yes,
solve it again.
agree. No, not at all. Even that, because during the whole fix and R&D stuff and all, we learn a lot of things that we didn't plan to. So actually, it made the whole setup for us that we were planning to in as a second phase of the setup. It made it a lot easier, because now we already knew many things that we didn't even plan to know, right? So yes, you're right. So while we were solving this lib SSL issue, it made our life a lot easier when we were doing the production setup along with Kubernetes. So yes, you're right.
I also see in here you appear to have some scripts or whatever that like your starting points for your containers are done in scripts. People don't talk about that a lot, and you didn't talk about it in your article. I know that I do this, and so I just kind of wondered. I mean, do you have to do a lot of work in your scripts or anything like that? I find that, for example, one of the things that I do is my scripts. wait for gems to get installed, for example, things like that. So I definitely, I know that I do work in them. I was just kind of curious. Do you do a bunch of work in your scripts that you have here? Little, a lot? How did that go?
So actually, that depends, Killian. Means how the project is. So if I would like to ping one of the URLs of Docker up. Yep, I got it. So this was the one that this is actually a Docker container. I am not sure if this is public and you would be able to see. So this is an image of the container which we had developed and which we were using among the team members. And so for this particular thing, we had to write a script, a Docker file.
Yes, I meant at the very last line of your Docker file, right? You have that entry point there, which is a .sh file.
Yes, correct. So those are the entry points for database setup, like for creating users on Postgres and all. So I like to keep that separate. So it makes a lot easier to fix something or to change something. Like for Postgres, we know that we need to create a user, we need to create a role, we need to set a password. So if it's good for me that if that sits up in a small script and I just need to worry about the script if anything I need to change or I need to fix if there is an issue. And the greater part is that it fixes for all the developers. So that's my approach for
No,
using separate
that's cool.
scripts.
I mean, so Postgres specifically, right? Like I think the standard Docker container, you can use environment variables, but that only works on like the first spin up or whatever, right?
Right.
So this is actually, yeah, it's a different way of doing it. It's interesting, and that's exactly what I was curious about. Is like what were you doing here, and like what kinds of things did you put in those? Awesome.
Thank you.
One thing that annoys me, I won't do my usual anti-Docker rant. All right, I won't do that. Okay, Dave isn't here to defend the Docker. So one thing I will ask is about logging. One thing that drives me mad with Docker is that it puts its logs into the kind of deepest, darkest directory in Linux, and it's all some kind of JSON file thing. Do you use the standard logging setup when you're using Docker with Rails, or do you do something else with your log files?
No, we set up with our local files only. So the logs are to work as it works when we start the Rails server on my local machine. So the logs we do the setup directly as like I am working in my local machine. And yes, so we can directly access the logs from the container itself, and you don't need to worry about. And it is displayed. I think it's displayed as it is, but I'm not sure what you are exactly talking about. But what we do when what we set up is almost the identical copy of what it runs on the local machine when we start the Rails server.
My typical scenario for debugging Docker, especially something where they've got different moving parts, is something has gone wrong somewhere in the log file. The log file is several tens of thousands of lines long, and I know if I see it, I can spot it. But I'm sat there for ages, and when you dash F the logs, it spews the whole thing down the page. And I'm sitting there for hours, especially if it's remote, which always is remote, waiting for all this text to arrive. And while this text is arriving, I'm thinking, Joe, why can't we just have logs? Why can't we have a nice text file? Why can't we go into log/production.log in the good old days? Sorry, did I say production? I meant staging. Yes, staging.log is where I'm looking for the errors. And one thing I've done recently is you can add a line if you're on Linux to add a line which is there's something along the lines of logs : journal D. And that will put all the logs into system D, so they just appear like normal logs. But for about a year, I was kind of raging against the Docker logging system, desperately searching in /var/mystery to look for log files.
So I got your pain point, I think. So what we usually do is we get into the container, okay, and so after getting into the container is again a machine. We go into the logs. So you must be knowing this, but I just would like to mention that we use a grep command in the Linux. So let's say Rails logs, and then directly slash t, and then or operator, and then grep, and whatever we need to find. So it only displays the content which has that particular string. And I think it also gives us the provision for displaying. So let's say it's ABC, and it will display line ABC if it has that word. We can also print 5 lines above and 5 lines below. We have to pass minus capital A number of lines you want to display above it, and minus B for the lines you want to display below that line, so that you can know from where that particular line comes from. So let's say you want to know the controller, the action, the params. It has to be above that line, right? Because it won't be, all the thing won't be on a single line. So likewise, we do the customization of the commands and use some simple tricks to get into the logs.
Yeah, you
Do you include those in part of your, like, do you have like a shared container that you share a lot of these things with when you start new containerizations of your apps, or is this something you just copy over into your workflow?
It is like we just carry over with along with our normal workflow. So we don't have any separate container, but yes, it's like a normal set. So we even we don't type it. We have already created the shell commands. So like we create normal, bash command, the aliases and all. So we already created it, and we just use those shell scripts, and we already made it available in the containers. So we don't need to write those commands. So they are already available in all the containers. And the entry points you talked about, Kalian, it has those. It includes. So it is one of the entry point to access that particular shell script. So we already have it configured. So all the things, because as a developer, we have to do more debugging than coding, because the applications that come to us for even for building features or solving any bugs, there has to be a debugging part which is common for all. So we need to make sure that we are setting up the environment so that it becomes easy for all for debugging. So that's my approach of working.
Hey folks, it's Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to jump on real quick and let you know that I am putting together a podcasting course. I get asked all the time. I've been coaching people for the last 6 months. How do you start a podcast? How do you put it together? What do I need in order to get it going, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've put together the curriculum, and I did it through coaching a whole bunch of people, and now I want to share it with you. You can go check out the course. It's actually going to be a masterclass. It's going to be a 4-week masterclass where I actually walk you through the entire process of launching a terrific sounding podcast and putting together content that people want to listen to. And you can find it at podcastbootcamp.io.
I definitely feel like log collation is almost a necessity with Docker stuff. I mean, we're talking about like how can I get into my container, right, and like get the logs out of it, which is it's a thing. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I totally employ it on a daily basis, but I think like once you sort of like go to production, or once you have like more than one container, like that starts to break down and become untenable. And I don't know, I definitely found like it quickly becomes a thing where log collation using either a service or something that, I mean, there's some free ones that you can set up too, sort of makes a lot more sense than trying to log into individual containers, get their logs out, right?
What do you mean by log collation? You mean putting all the logs like from different machines in one place?
Yep. Yeah, there's a number of services that do that. I mean,
Yep.
I'm trying to think of what I can think of off the top of my head. It's like Logstash or something like that, like Datadog.
You're talking about log DNA. If that's one of the service we are using for
Sure.
log
Yep.
collation.
Yeah, something that collects them all. I think all of the if I recall correctly, like the honey badgers and the air brakes, I think they can all do some of this too. I haven't used any of them for this, but I do believe they can. Don't quote me on that, but
Log DNA is a good service. So we have been using it in one of the projects. So when one of the client was technical, and we had to make sure that we are not giving up some details, wrong details to anyone. So we had set it up this service of log DNA. So it showed each and every, so we can, it has a provision to set up the environment. Even the local can be allows us to set up there. So we can development, staging, production, even the sidekick logs. So all the logs are available. We it has the provision to to allow to set up to all type of logs. So yes, it's a good option if you want to simplify the logs and how we see it. And then the whole option of going into the containers is gone, because we are now directly looking into logs into the log DNA or any similar kind of service. So it has all type of provision, like we can search like we do normal search on any application. So it makes a lot of things very easier, I think. But yes, it is bit costly. So we need to make the choice accordingly, because it goes with the storage plans and the number of users it allows to use. So it goes likewise. So yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some motivation in there for you to set up like your own. I don't remember what the open source one is. Is it? I don't remember off the top of my head, but I was also going to say I did some looking up, and I think I was definitely I think I was thinking of some setups where people like had like Honey Badger Airbrake like alongside a logging collation. Doesn't look like they do that out of the box. So uh, don't take that. Don't run off with that. You're gonna want something more like Graylog to Logstash or Datadog, things like that. So or Log DNA or whatever.
Okay,
Awesome.
sounds.
Ziff, I had a question about because you have in here in your article a note about Docker UI tool, a GUI tool. I use Kitematic. What do you mostly use that for?
So when I started, I was using because on Ubuntu machines we don't have that much options, and most of so we have a Docker, I think hub. What's the name? I don't remember. On the Mac machines, in the Mac OS, so it's available there. It's very much easy. It's we don't have to spend a lot of time. But on the Ubuntu machines, it's a lot of difficult task for setting up these tools. So it's like we can we can manage these containers from console. But again, for for getting all the containers on a UI, on an application, makes things easier. So what this Kitematic tool I found easier to work on. If anyone is working on an Ubuntu machine, then they surely should try this. If they are if they have done the setup for Docker and they want to see all the Dockers running, if they want to start, stop, debug, even the Rails console can start from there, from the UI. So all those sort of things can be done directly from this tool, or whichever tool we are using for Docker. What's the name?
Docker provides a similar UI if you're running on Mac or Windows, right? Then you're probably using Docker for Mac or Docker for Windows. And so you just default get this or a very similar tool installed. If you like open up the little Docker whale thing, you'll see something similar to Kitematic in that way. I don't actually
Yes.
use it very often, so I actually have never spent the time comparing them.
It's,
I
I think, Docker Desktop for Mac. I think that's
what was that? Is it?
Docker Desktop. It's the
Yes.
name of the application
Oh,
we
yeah, yeah.
use.
You're right. They renamed it. That's correct. Yeah, and it's more or less the same for Windows. Yeah.
Yeah, so for Windows and Mac, it works, it's very smooth, but it's not available for the Ubuntu machines. And then we have to go around and find all sorts of other tools which are working. And again, Ubuntu is very much difficult. So if you are landing on a version which is not an LTS, LTS version of Ubuntu, then you are getting yourself into a lot of trouble, because the support is not if you land into a issue, there is no support and there is no option for you to solve that issue unless you are changing the version of your Ubuntu OS. So there's a lot of issues. But yes, it's great amount of learning, I think. I take that in that way, and we get to know a lot of things that I think if it would have been easy for me to do the setup, I wouldn't have learned, I think. And I wouldn't have tried other things, because things were already easy for me if it was in that case. Yes, so I think that everyone should try. Means we always do, but everyone should try at least 1 or 2 years on Ubuntu machine, because that gives good idea of how errors can be errors are type of errors, and how can we solve them. And in that path we get a lot of other things to explore, and then we learn some new things. So yeah, it's a great journey up till now.
Huzefa, on the note of you going through and learning about Docker and setting up Dockerized apps for your Rails stuff, about how long did it take you to kind of get up to speed? Like, would you recommend this for other people as an example to go the Docker route? Was it challenging for you, or was it pretty straightforward from your experience?
It was kind of a mixed feeling for me. So it was easy to install Docker, obviously, but as I said, we need to first finalize the tools. So if you're able to see the link that I shared, that was a container, that was the first container which I had to the create for my application. So we had to finalize all the Linux tools, and with along with versions. So which tool we need to install, or any Docker container. Okay, and then we can go along with the Rails and bundle install and database setup and all. So this part, setting up this Linux tool part, yes, as I mentioned, that it was a lot difficult, because Docker will install, but you need to make sure that you are not installing any tool which is not supported by the kernel of the OS that you are installing it into. So that's a very important thing that I have experienced and learned in my experience. So because it will land you in an area of trouble where it's it's kind of, it goes deeper and deeper, you cannot come out of it. So it's very important, but it's like it's one time ask for any developer. So if I have done all the setup, I have spent all the time, I think n number of people can use directly. So let's say you have the same setup by coincidence, and you decide, okay, let me use this container or this setup or this script directly, because it is already there. So it's, I think it's 5 or 10 minutes task for anyone to set up for, because it's already there. So yes, I obviously recommend to all, and we do follow this, because in all our projects we have created containers. Even if the client doesn't ask, we do internally. So we don't push that code on production, but we do the setup internally, and then we work accordingly. So yes, I would recommend, and I encourage any developer that might come in my contact, or if he or she is working with me, to use Docker to, because it makes a lot of things easier. Means it gives when we talk about me and n number of people being on the same page, it's that kind of platform. Like we all are on the same page, we are not talking about anything which is not present or not correct or not wrong. If anyone is speaking, so if anyone is speaking, it applies to all. If it not, if it so it doesn't apply to anyone. It's that kind of thing. The Docker is. So yes, I am, and I think so I actually moved ahead for Docker. I think I'm using Doku, so that's a lot easier again from Docker. So I have started, but it requires some knowledge, because you can not directly switch from Docker to Doku. We need to do some customization and all. But yes, again, it's a learning path, and it generally comes along with the experience.
Are there any tools that you wish existed in the Docker space as you were starting things up, or anything that you saw that was missing from the process of Dockerizing your Rails app?
Okay. Yes. So for Docker, I can account for current scenario, but when I started, there were very less references for for setting up the Docker and all. So it's a kind of thing that most of the people don't do. So if you need to get the advice or any suggestion, you are on your own, and with Stack Overflow or Google with the option. So I think that as a, I don't know if Docker needs to do or the Rails community needs to do, but there has to be there should be some different articles. I know DigitalOcean already has, but it's very limited. When you go to practical projects and all, when you implement that, there are lots of things and which you don't find, and you need to, most of the things you are implementing first time, right? So I think there is no references for those things on a single platform, and I understand that it won't. But I think if there was such, like I would like to give an example of our Rails guides. So Docker has similar guide, but Rails guides, I think it's the most simpler document guide I have seen. I have gone through Java. I worked in PHP, but it's the simplest guide and a well maintained guide I have seen in any technology. So I think I am not saying it the same or replica, but the similar kind of thing I expect it should be for Docker too. And regarding the tool that was your actual question, I think that the UI, even where we discussed the Docker desktop or Kitematic or any tool that we are using, it is very limited to what we use or we would want to use. Like for example, I can start or stop or do I can start a Rails console, but I cannot do something which I would like to do for like I'm doing for CI/CD thing, right? So it doesn't give me that flexibility to start to mock the environment which I'm doing for Kubernetes pods and all. So there should be some lighter version of that in and because that gives me a lot of idea that how it would be if I would deploy it on production. Right. If I am already knowing that in development itself, then it's when I'm deploying on production, it makes a lot of things easier for me. So that kind of platform, I would say, bridge should have be. I think that's missing, but I think that's a different issue to address. But yes, so that's a thing that I think I would want in Docker.
I think that makes a lot of sense too, right? How often have we talked about here on the show and or like how often out there in our own particular lives have you found yourself having a discussion about Docker and people are literally talking about how painful and how big the gap seems to be from where they are to starting. Like that's literally what we're all talking about all the time. It's like, no, it's totally worth it to cross this crevasse and get to the other side. You should do it. And everyone's like, it's a really deep crevasse. Hello. I think you make some good points, Huzefa. Like I agree. Like as you were talking, I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. Docker reference material is like pretty terrible when we compare it to our Rails experience, right? And we complain about JavaScript and PHP and all the things like all the time. And we're just like, Ruby docs are so much better, blah, blah, blah. And good point. Docker logs are terrible. We should definitely make sure to not for
I will say Docker is an improvement, but it doesn't deliver on its core promise, which is to fail to it works on my machine. It does not eliminate that problem. We had a junior developer who's working remotely in another part of Europe, and we couldn't get this Docker container, Docker app running on his machine. And pretty much every senior dev spent quite an extended time on it. And in the end, it was a strange problem. This is totally standard Rails app in a Docker Compose container. He didn't have enough RAM on his machine. And because it was Docker for Windows, it kind of started the container and then dropped out. And it just didn't have enough RAM to run it. And again, you're in exactly the same place as you were a few years ago, where you're onboarding someone and everyone's just going, oh, why can't the software run on this computer? But it does eliminate a whole load of more mainstream problems like no SSL certificates and this kind of thing. The real question is, Docker a helpful technology, or is it an angry whale that eats all my CPU and RAM? Is Docker a useful container technology, or is it a conspiracy by big cloud to sell more instances?
I think the real question here is it possible in today's modern environment to do coding on Windows at all? I don't know, man. I have so I think that Docker for Windows under certain conditions seems to be fine. But yeah, I am not gonna lie. I have been pretty hands off with Windows for almost the past decade. It's so much harder to get anyone working on Windows than it is on Linux or Mac. Like I'll take all the weird stuff that comes with Linux like every day. Totally happy with it, right? Since we're in Rails world and everyone's using Mac apparently. But Windows problems, like they have nothing to do with what you're doing. They're all Windows related. And you have to know the Windows problem, or the fact that Windows is allowing this person to run on archaic hardware and they just don't realize it yet until they have to do something that's hard that requires more RAM.
I
I'll
think
stop bashing Windows.
so. I think I agree with the problem. So I have so not a lot, but I also faced a similar issue. Not myself, but one of my friends. So Docker gives you the option to choose how much RAM you want to use for a single container. So by default, it has some number, but we can increase or decrease that RAM usage. So I think that can be a solution for this kind of problems. Like we can mention, configure the amount of RAM the each container can use. Because I agree, because now we are using 8 GB and 16 GB of RAM in the laptops, but earlier we were having 4 GB or 2 GB of RAM. So this kind of issues would certainly pop up if Docker container is taking, let's say, 0.5 GB RAM, right? So I agree. And I think that's where Doku comes into picture, because it's a lot lighter than Docker, and it solves this issue. You can say conspiracy of eating up the RAM and memory. So I think that's the solution that you are looking for.
I will check it out. I'd not even heard of Doku before. It's if it's not going to annihilate my system every time I want to run my Rails app, then it'll make me happy. I know all the open BSD people are laughing from inside their CH roots. I know that the other operating systems have much better containerization. I think Solaris had a fancy system too, didn't it, back in the day for containerizing applications?
There are actually a few alternatives to Docker out there. And it may very well be that we may all end up using them in a few years. I've never pushed anyone, and I've never really jumped ship to use any of them, because I'm more interested in the stability of the system. And so like I want the massive community that's behind Docker. But if that community starts moving towards one of the alternatives, like I'll probably be more comfortable with exploring, right? Because I'm using this like from development machine, right, all the way through production. So I'm interested in stability all across the pipeline, and I'm not totally like, yes, maybe the system works today, but what happens when, I don't know, something updates or something, right? Like I'm interested in that whole stability ecosystem, I guess. I'm not really sure what we call that, but there are a whole handful of alternatives that you can try.
I agree on that part, but I think Docker, I found the most interesting and the most simplest part of Docker is that setting up the Docker compose file. So I think that's the most simplest part, and it is written in a very layman language. Yes, I agree that it's a YML, but if anyone who doesn't have the knowledge, and if it just reads the Docker compose YML, can make a sense out of it, like what it's doing, not technically, but on a basic understanding level. So, for example, let's say a container, we are defining a container, and we want to say like the database, right? Database container. It should run after the application has started. Okay. Or the sidekick one. Sidekick should start before after the Rails application has started. So we can directly write depends on. So there's a depends on a keyword in Docker Compose, and then we can directly write it. Sidekick depends on the Rails application, and it will start after the Rails application is started. So I agree with the other alternatives, but I find that the most easier one. That might be the reason because I have practically used this and I find it easy. But yes, so I find this very much easy to implement and even to explain to anyone. So if anyone is new, it's very much easy for me to explain and get them working as soon as possible. So yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to push us along to picks, but this is really interesting. And I think there are a lot of options that people have that we've talked through. So we'll refer people to your article. Hopefully people can find some other resources that'll help them get what they need from a Docker-like setup. But yeah, let's head over into picks. Hey folks, it's Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to jump in here and let you know about something that I'm doing. It's free. It's out there just to help you get answers to your questions about the things that you're running into with your career. So if you have questions about how to get further ahead in your career, how to start a podcast, how to get a better job, how to get a raise, how to deal with a situation at work with your boss, or just maybe you're stuck and you don't know where to go next. How do I get from junior to senior to whatever's next. How do I become a speaker? How do I get to the next level? That's what I'm out here to do. So every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Mountain Time, I'm going to be doing a call, and it's going to be free, totally free. Go to devchat.tv/level up and you can register for the call. It's using Zoom's webinar software, so it's pretty straightforward. And what we're going to be doing is I'll do 10 minutes and I'll just show you how I do some form of how I level up. And then we'll just answer questions. And it's not going to be a question and answer like, hey, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? And then I say Rocky Road or whatever, right? Instead, what we're looking for is more along the lines of, yeah, I have this situation. How do I handle it? I'm trying to figure this thing out. How do I figure it out? I'm trying to stay current. How do I stay current? And if you have any of those kinds of questions, I'll bring you on the call. We'll ask some deeper questions. We'll make sure we get you a solid answer. And I'm really looking forward to helping some people out. There will be no sales, no selling, no nothing on these calls. It is literally just 10 minutes of training and then Q&A. So you can go check it out at devchat.tv/level up. Luke, do you want to start us off with picks?
This is the most proud pick, but I'd like you to look at my enormous flask. Have a look at that.
Hey, we got a clean rating on this show.
This I think you'll agree, this is the largest hot water containment device you've ever seen. This is I think it's 2, do you have liters in the USA? It's a kind of over 2 liter. This holds so much coffee. I need to buy a bigger coffee machine. This is amazing. And I can sit at my desk for about 4 hours straight. I reckon I'll probably develop deep vein thrombosis by the end of a month because I never have to get up and get a drink again. So first pick, slightly abstract, an enormous hot water containment device to keep your coffee in. But I did have a proper pick, and it was elves. Not just any elves, but 64-bit ELF files, which are the binaries. They're like a Linux exe. And I found this article where a guy creates an elf from scratch, byte by byte, and explains what every single byte does in the executable file. And I thought it was absolutely riveting. So that's my pick for this week. How 64-bit executables work on the Linux.
Awesome. John, do you have some picks?
I have one. Though I was thinking as Luke was talking, the only thing that I think that we use, I mean, we have liters over here in the US, but I think the only thing that we use it for that I can think of is liquor. Like they sell it all in 750 mil, like it's sort of the standard, right? But other than that, I can't think of anything that like we actually use liters for really.
They sell 2-liter bottles of soda.
Oh, yep. Forgot about that one.
And I've seen liter bottles of water too. So
do you not have liters for car engines? Do you use, or do you use CC?
You fill it with gallons of gas.
No, but the engine size, yeah, some of the engine sizes are liters. It depends on the brand you're buying it, and yeah.
So there are more things that I can't think of, but they exist. It's in hiding over here. Anyway, so I recently have been, a long time ago, there was a game that came out called, you may have heard of it, called Minecraft or whatever, and I enjoyed it a little bit way back when it was in alpha, and then I stopped, and now I have a child. And it is, I'm rediscovering this game. My son loves Legos, and so he loves Minecraft. It's like, anyway, it's a very recent experience that we have been enjoying this together. And I stopped playing Minecraft, and I kind of looked at it as being kind of like cheesy and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with this. And well, obviously I was wrong. It's super cool to enjoy with your kids. Just saying. So that's literally my pick for this week.
Do you run your own server? Have you got your own Minecraft server?
Well, of course, in a Docker container, like,
right?
And that's not even a joke.
I set one up in the cloud so my kids can play it with their cousins on the same server.
I actually set one up for my whole streaming community or whatever to play on as well. And it was pretty easy to do or whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, it's fairly easy. There's a few Docker containers out there, and with a little bit of work, you can get it set up. I definitely recommend using a Docker Compose. It just helps manage your environment variables and things like that. But you do you. But yep. Anyway, so Minecraft was big. Oh my, it's definitely been. I've been doing some of that for the past few weeks, and my son is literally coming up to me like every night, can we play Minecraft? And I'm like, we don't do it every night. So some nights I'm just like, oh, not tonight. But other nights I'm like, well, you haven't been listening, or things like that, whatever. Anyway, it's a thing, and he really likes building stuff. And I mean, I guess what young kid doesn't? I mean, I don't know. That's been my experience. So it's been great. I've enjoyed playing with him. I highly recommend to people that are like wondering if it's worth your time. It's pretty clean, and it's super engaging for him, and I'm able to limit it pretty well. So all of these things are pluses from my standpoint as a dad. So
Awesome. Valentino, do you have some picks?
Sure. So I actually have 4 picks, so I'm going to run through these pretty quick. The first one is an article by my coworker, Ben Simpson. He just wrote where he talks about using Thor instead of Rake for a lot of things. It's pretty great. Next, they're all software related this week. I've been busy, but I discovered this gem called RSpec Tracer, which basically traces code execution as you run specs, and then can opt to skip tests that are unrelated to code changes. So it works pretty well. I tried it on a very large code base, and it took quite a long time to run some of the specs. I think I was doing it wrong, but definitely a promising library. The next thing I discovered was called New Shell. It's like just a new shell, like Bash or Fish or something like that. It's built in Rust, though, super fast, and they do some interesting things with the command results that are pretty remarkable. And then I'll just plug the last thing. I'm wearing a Ruby Kaigi shirt. Next week is Ruby Kaigi. I'm looking forward to listening to it as much as I can from the conference. It's a virtual conference for Ruby core in Japan. So it's all virtual this year because of the virus again. So I'm looking for. They have a lot of great lineups.
Cool. I'm going to jump in with a few picks. First of all, I am putting together a podcasting boot camp. It's going to be 4 weeks. You will have a great sounding podcast by the time you are done. You're going to get like video walkthroughs, but you'll also have like Q&A calls and access to me through Discord. We use both and it confuses. Anyway, Discord. So yeah, if you have a question, we can either just hop on a voice chat on Discord, or you can chat your question and get an answer. So anyway, I'm super excited about it. I think it'll help some people kind of take their careers off to the next level. So I'm going to pick that. It's podcastbootcamp.io. And then, I've been listening to a book called The Sword of Shannara with my kids when I drive them to school. And I read them way back when I was in school, but I really enjoyed those. And my kids are starting to get into them now. So I'm going to shout out about that fantasy series because those are fun. And then I've also been listening to Ready Player One, mainly because I want to read Ready Player 2, even though I've heard from several people that it's nowhere close to as good. We'll see what I think. So Ready Player One is a terrific book, and I definitely enjoyed that. So I'm going to pick that. Huzefa, what are your picks?
I'm not sure.
Anything you like.
I would pick Doku itself. So that's a thing that I think is yet to be explored. And if we can discuss more about it, it benefits a lot of people, because until now I have met a lot of developers across different projects. And once they got into Doku, they were pretty much excited and they were encouraged to replace it with Docker. So I think that will benefit. So that's only thing that is currently in my mind at the moment.
Cool. If people want to check in with you online, follow you on Twitter, things like that, where do they find you?
Sure, I will share my Twitter handle.
All right. We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, so here we go. And I will also share my LinkedIn, so that because I'm more active and I'm more post articles and talk about things there more, because there are a lot of developers who come on to a single platform, while me or any developer puts anything related to Ruby, Rails, Python, anything. So it's a good platform for me to share tech related things. Yes.
Cool.
So
we'll put a link to your LinkedIn then as well. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.